All right, let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to untangle a really counterintuitive reality about using generative AI for high-stakes academic writing. We're living in this wild moment where large language models seem like the ultimate shortcut for knocking out massive scholarly projects, like dissertations. But, as we're about to see, relying on these tools for deep, rigorous research actually throws some totally unexpected roadblocks right in your path.
You know that bizarre feeling? It's the core frustration so many writers are running into right now. You ask an AI for help, and sure, it spits out pages of perfectly punctuated text, but then, working with that text somehow leaves you way more mentally exhausted than if you just stared at a blank page and started typing. Basically, you end up having to mentally untangle a logical flow that totally clashes with your own natural authorial style. It's exhausting.
To really put this into perspective, a massive 82% of students report using AI-generated outlines to help manage the downright daunting organizational demands of their research. And honestly, it makes perfect sense. A doctoral thesis is a beast. We're talking anywhere from 80 to over 300 pages. So the temptation to just hit a button and get immediate structural clarity is incredibly strong.
But here's where things get wild. It's the reverse Pareto Principle in action. Even though these models generate huge volumes of text, researchers actually end up discarding about 80% of it. They only retain a tiny 20% fraction to use as their final structural scaffold. Think about that. An AI output might be 80% correct, but it usually only delivers about 20% of the actual, deep scholarly value you need to pass a defense. So, why are we throwing so much of this stuff away?
Well, here's a quick look at our roadmap for this explainer. We'll be hitting the AI writing paradox, the new cognitive load, psycholinguistics of machine text, disclosure and academic integrity, the algorithmic scaffold, and finally, the resilient human author.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the AI writing paradox, prototype versus production.
Here's the thing. Writing a thesis absolutely is not like writing software code. With code, you can usually just isolate a bug and fix a single function. But academic prose, it's completely holistic. If an AI builds you a house that's 80% okay, but the foundational logic is weak, you can't just patch the drywall. You literally have to demolish the whole thing and start over. That final 20% of the chronological work, the deep analytical rigor and original synthesis, that is the real core intellectual labor.
Moving right along to Section 2, the new cognitive load, AI-assisted authorship.
These numbers are so revealing because they perfectly illustrate the weird trade-off of AI. Look at critical evaluation. It demands the absolute highest mental effort, pulling a 4.81 on the scale. AI definitely compresses the time it takes to execute a draft, for sure, but it drastically expands your cognitive responsibility. You aren't really a writer anymore. You've basically been promoted to managing a highly confident, occasionally hallucinating, unpaid intern. You're constantly bouncing between prompting and editing, which creates massive task switching costs and totally shatters the deep focus you need for genuine original insights.
Which brings us to Section 3, the psycholinguistics of machine text.
So why does AI text always sound kind of robotic to a trained academic committee, even when the grammar is literally flawless? Well, it all comes down to two psycholinguistic markers that you use naturally without even thinking about it: burstiness and metacognition. When we humans wrestle with complex ideas, our working memory gets strained. That strain creates natural variations in how long our sentences are. That's burstiness. And it causes abrupt stylistic changes or little iterative corrections as we reflect on our own arguments. That's metacognition. Those subtle, messy imperfections are exactly what give writing an authentic, lived-in human voice.
Large language models, on the other hand, well, they don't get tired, they don't experience cognitive load, and they definitely don't pause to think. Because of that, they generate text with this syntactic flatness. It's incredibly polished, it's uniform, but it completely lacks the contextual depth of actual human-lived experience. It relies on high-probability words and these really overwrought transition phrases. And honestly, that is exactly why it's so exhausting to edit. You're sitting there trying to force human rhythm into a rigid, mathematically generated flow.
All right, let's pivot a bit for Section 4, disclosure and academic integrity.
Let's ground this in reality for a second. Look at the graduate school guidelines for Florida International University. Similar to tons of major institutions and publishers today, they hammer home one core principle. AI tools cannot be authors, period. AI just doesn't have the intent, the specialized expertise, or the ethical judgment required for true scholarly accountability. At the end of the day, you, the human, carry the sole responsibility for whatever ends up in that final product.
And it's a pretty clear breakdown, right? On the acceptable side, yes, absolutely use AI to brainstorm, organize your ideas, build an outline, or clean up minor grammar. Go for it. But on the unacceptable side, asking an AI to write substantive chunks of your thesis, or relying on it to polish or rewrite entire sections, that hard crosses the line into unauthorized content creation. Publishers are getting strict about this. They don't see AI paraphrasing as simple proofreading anymore. They see it as text generation.
So, into Section 5, the algorithmic scaffold, and how we actually tame the AI.
Now that we know the psycholinguistic traps and the academic rules, how do we actually use this stuff safely? The secret sauce is entirely in how you constrain the model. You use a style blueprint to train the AI and force it away from its robotic default settings. You command it to prioritize conciseness, so no more passive, wordy fluff. You demand assertiveness, meaning it has to use declarative, data-backed statements, not vague generalizations. And you use an imperative tone. By keeping the prompt on a really tight leash, you tame the AI into generating a structural scaffold that actually fits your academic niche. That way, you save your mental energy for the actual complex analysis.
And listen, if you do use these tools, transparency is absolutely your best friend. This is a great example of a mandatory AI disclosure statement. You have to include something like this in your preliminary pages. You spell out exactly which tools you used and outline the very specific, limited scope of how you use them. Doing this protects you from academic misconduct flags and ensures you and your committee are totally on the same page.
Finally, wrapping up with Section 6, the resilient human author.
Realizing that an AI draft is only 20% useful isn't a failure. Actually, it's a testament to how rigorous real academic research is. That final 20% of your time, the deep analytical rigor, critically evaluating your sources, injecting your own stylistic burstiness, your original insights, that is what actually creates 80% of the value in your scholarship. AI can give you the scaffolding, sure, but you are the one who has to construct the building.
So I want to leave you with this question to chew on as you tackle your own writing. As these models get faster and faster at generating structure, your real, undeniable value is in the depth of your analysis. How are you going to ensure your unique authorial voice and your critical human intellect continue to cut right through all that algorithmic noise? Thanks for joining me on this explainer.